The conflict between Israel and the Palestinians or between Israel and the Arabs is not a religious conflict. If you don't believe me, let us go back to the Six-Day War, when the great protagonists of the conflict were Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt and Levi Eshkol and Moshe Dayan in Israel, all professed atheists. Nobody went to war over theology. They went to war over territory. And this is a territorial conflict between Jewish nationalism, that we call Zionism, and Palestinian nationalism, and maybe even to a degree even pan-Arab nationalism. Therefore, this is a territorial conflict, and it can be resolved theoretically through territorial compromise. Whether practically we're capable or not is another issue. But because it's not a religious conflict doesn't mean that religion is irrelevant to the conflict. The conflict involves people with identities, and those identities are rooted within histories, within cultures, and within religious traditions. And we use those religious resources in the context of conflict, and often we abuse them in the context of conflict. We draw on them to give ourselves self-justification, whether Jew or Muslim or Christian, and we abuse those sources to delegitimize the attachment of the other. And therefore, to ignore the religious dimension in the conflict is just downright stupid. In my opinion, part of the reason for the failure of the Oslo Accords is the failure of the political leadership, both locally but above all internationally, to take the religious dimension seriously. And, you know, I'm very perplexed by the behavior of the United States of America and its State Department in that regard. I mean, George Mitchell was sent over by Obama during his first administration, I don't know how many dozen times. I tried so hard to get a message through to encourage him to meet with religious leaders. He didn't meet with a single Christian leader, let alone a Muslim or Jewish leader, and he certainly didn't meet with the Council of Religious Institutions of the Holy Land, which is a council of religious leaders that we've been able to create for the first time, involving the chief rabbinate of Israel, the Sharia courts of the Palestinian Authority, its Ministry of Waqf, and the patriarchs and the bishoprics of the Holy Land. An amazing achievement that we've been able to build this council. Well, why is it important to engage this council? It's not important because religious leaders themselves will bring a resolution to the conflict. No, they do not have the capacity to do that in our part of the world, especially where religious leaders are not independent anyway. The chief rabbis and chief rabbinate are elected by an electoral process that includes Israeli politicians. So it's definitely not an autonomous, independent entity. The Sharia courts of the Palestinian Authority and the Minister of Waqf are part of the government structure there. They're subject, if not subjugated, by their political authorities. Christians are a bit better. But nevertheless, they don't have any power. So in that sense, they're marginal to it. So the religious leader is not going to bring a breakthrough, and they are not going to be a source of bringing about a resolution to the conflict. However, my claim is that no political initiative of any kind will succeed without the support of the religious authorities. And that's what gets my goat, what irritates me so much, in terms of the political engagement that ignores a religious dimension. Because what do you say to the religious leaders if you don't meet with them? You say, at best, you're irrelevant, I don't care a hoot about you. Or you say you're part of the problem. And then you create a self-fulfilling prophecy, because religious communities say, well, this guy is avoiding me because he thinks I'm part of the problem, he doesn't want my well-being, and therefore this must be inimical to my interests, and therefore something that I mustn't support. I understand why certain politicians avoid the religious dimension. When you see the terrible things done in our part of the world in the name of religion, you can understand it. But if you think that the answer to the terrible things that are done in the name of religion is to ignore religion, you're kidding yourself. You're making it worse. You're playing into the hands of the extremists because you're giving them the only voice in terms of religious visibility. If you don't want religion to be part of the problem, you've got to make it part of the solution. And the way to do that is to engage the moderate voices, which represent the vast majority of religious people, Muslims, Palestinians, as well as Israeli Jews who want simply to live in peace. They may have different concepts as to how to get there. They may be highly suspicious of one another's motives. But each of them in their own life, in their own world, want simply to provide food for their children, to live a decent life. Most people don't lie in bed thinking about how I can harm somebody else, let alone kill them. And if they're religious leaders who are the vast majority, who are not violent people, can be seen to be engaged and support it, then the message you send through gives the psycho-spiritual, historical, cultural support to it. That is critical. So religious leaders themselves will not bring about an end to the conflict, but I don't believe any end to the conflict will ever succeed without the engagement of religious leaders.